Now, Exhibit 203, which we won't publish at this time, contains some training records, and those training records indicate that crisis intervention training was offered within 2016 and also 2018. And I'd like to talk to you about the larger block, the 2016 block. Now, first I have to ask you, do you recognize the name Derek Chauvin?
Yes.
How do you recognize it?
I recognize the name Derek Chauvin through training.
Okay. You're familiar with this person?
No.
Would you recognize him if you saw him?
Yes.
All right. Do you see him in the courtroom today?
He has a mask on. I'm assuming that's him.
All right. May the record reflect that the witness has identified the defendant.
Record also reflect.
Exhibit 203, the training records indicate that in 2016, the defendant participated in a lengthier course, approximately a 40-hour course in crisis intervention training. Are you familiar with that type of course, the 40-hour crisis intervention training course?
Yes.
And is that a course that you've personally participated in as a student?
That course was delivered to the department, to the officers by Minnesota CIT Officers Associations.
And can you, just in general terms, explain what that course covers?
That course covers individual in crisis, symptoms, and de-escalation strategies that may be used for individual in crisis. So it's a scenario-based training.
What do you mean by that?
The trainer, Minnesota CIT Officers Association, brings in professional actors to come in and to conduct crisis scenarios where they're in a state of crisis, and then our officer has to use de-escalating strategies to bring them down to pre-crisis level or to help them out.
And so the officers are given an opportunity to practice recognizing what may be signs of persons in crisis and respond appropriately?
Yes.
Right. I'd like to talk to you about a related concept. You familiar with the critical decision-making model?
Yes, I do.
How are you familiar with that model?
I attended the critical decision-making model was introduced to us by the police executive research forums. I, along with some of my colleagues, we attended a training session that was conducted by a representative from PERF, or the Police Executive Research Forums, and we adapted that model to MPD's use to guide our officers in their decision-making process.
And does the critical decision-making model, is there an application to crisis intervention?
Yes, it does.
Also an application to use of force?
Yes.
And sometimes those decisions will have to be made contemporaneously, is that right?
Yes.
At this time, I'd like to publish Exhibit 276, the critical decision-making model. You recognize this document?
Yes, sir.
And this is the critical decision-making model with which you're familiar?
Yes, sir.
Could you please explain, based on your familiarity with this graphic, the middle circle?
The middle circle, what you see in the middle circle are voice, neutrality, respect, and trust. Those are the pillars of procedural justice that was introduced to the department.
What is procedural justice?
Procedural justice basically is the legitimacy in our action. What we do, our action legitimate, and that is what procedural justice is legitimacy.
And the training center also offers courses in procedural justice as well, is that right?
That is correct, yes.
This critical decision-making model is adapted in part from those materials, the procedural justice materials.
That is correct, yes.
Okay. Now, going back to the outer part of the circle, the first step of information gathering, and you see that it goes kind of a wheel that's supposed to represent critical decision-making or thinking, is that right?
That's correct.
Would you please, we've heard a little bit about this critical thinking decision-making model already, but I'd like you to discuss how this works in the context of crisis intervention, starting with the first block.
Starting is information gathering. We believe that this model has application not only for crisis, but especially for crisis. That is why it is part of our crisis curriculum. And the first circle, what you see there is information gathering. And information gathering is really crucial to what tactics or what decisions we're going to make. And information gathering could be based on dispatch, or it could be based on the own officer's observation.
Observations of what?
Observation of the scene, observation of the person, could be observation of the environment that's going on.
And some of these observations, for example, could just be physical observations, right? The officer could look at the person and make some sort of an assessment as to whether or not there's a behavioral crisis.
Yes.
Listening, is that also important?
Listening is important, yes.
Any other information that an officer would generally assess or take in when considering whether a person is in crisis?
Even listening is key. Other observation, even touch. For example, if you observe hands is on the person, you can sometimes sense tensing up, and you can tell that maybe the person's in crisis or not.
Then going to the next step, taking that information and potentially assessing it. What's the threat risk assessment block?
Risk is the possibility that something bad or dangerous may happen, and threat, in a sense, is the danger, and whether that danger is going to cause harm or not.
Now, with risk, you say it's the potential, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean that the person is being threatened or themselves is threatened. Is that right?
That is correct, yes, sir.
It's just the mere possibility. And many people could present some sort of a risk. Everybody presents some sort of a risk, right?
Yes.
And it's up to the officer in the information gathering to determine whether that risk is small, large, or elevates to a threat.
Sustained.
And how does the, I apologize, Your Honor, how does the officer then assess whether or not a risk is small, large, or could develop into a threat?
That is up to the officers and the totality of circumstances and information they have at that time.
The next step then, after the threat or risk assessment, authority to act, could you please describe how that step is taken in the context of crisis intervention?
The authority to act is based on our policy, also based on state statutes and case law too, for individual in crisis. And those are some of the authority that we have in handling people in crisis.
Some of those policies and the authority could include the use of force policy?
Yes.
The de-escalation policy?
Yes.
And the crisis intervention policy?
Yes, sir.
The next step then, goals and actions. Please describe the thinking model in terms of crisis intervention regarding goals and actions.
Goals and action is also contingency based on the information. Really, the ultimate goal and action of somebody in a crisis is to see if that person needs help and what kind of help. Does that person need to go to the hospital, or does the person can be turned over to somebody that has the authority to watch over that person? So it's really to go for somebody in crisis is determined to see if that person needs help.
And then the next block in terms of crisis intervention, review and reassess. Could you please describe how that works in this scenario?
Review and reassess is as information becomes available, we continuously review and reassess the situation to see if our technique on de-escalation or other technique is working. If it's not working, then we adjust our technique, strategies.
Okay. Could you also then go backwards and adjust your goals and actions?
Yes, you can.
Okay. So, for example, if initially the goal is to arrest someone, after taking in information, if you determine the person needed medical attention, could you act on that?
Yes.
And then what would the action be if the person was in need of medical attention?
That would be the immediate goal for us. If somebody's in need of medical attention, then we give them medical attention.
Okay. And then that would also relate to backwards to the authority to act. Is that right?
Yes.
Looking at the policy, and there's a duty to provide medical attention in the policy, right?
Yes.
Now, how is this critical decision-making model imparted to Minneapolis police officers in the training program?
We believe in the application of these critical decision-making models. So I introduced this model with approval, of course, to the department in 2018.
And, you've been in the situation where you've had to use force before. You were in the field for a long time. Do you have an assessment as to whether or not this model is useful in the field?
I believe it's useful. That is why we introduced this model and introduced it to the officers.
And is it practical?
It is practical. Yeah, I believe it is practical.
And can you explain how so? I mean, some of these situations involving police officers occur fairly quickly. Is that right?
That is true.
Is it possible for a police officer to use this critical thinking model in the field when events are unfolding quickly?
It is possible. Through rehearsing, reusing this model, it will almost be like it could be almost like memory. And when we talk about fast evolving situations, I know that they do exist, they do happen, but a lot of the time, converse of that is that a lot of the time, we have the time to slow things down and reevaluate, reassess, and go through this model.
Do you provide this training because you believe it works?
I provide this training because I believe it works, yes.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.